Caroline, thanks for coming in to have a chat to us today. Tell me a little bit about what it is you'll be presenting for us today.
I'm going to talk about, despite a very dismal picture of newspaper publishing, it's a very, very exciting time in terms of the tools available for online publishing.
You describe it as being a dismal time. There's a lot of conjecture at the moment in the US about the future of newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
What's your view as to the business model itself and the way that the business model will play out?
I think it will continue to be advertising supported, but I think that newspapers, just like Fairfax Digital, are finding different ways to make money, basically, online that may not be related to the content of the newspaper.
Now, in the US, though, we are hearing a lot of stories about publishers that are in trouble, they're going bankrupt or having difficulty, etc. How much of what you see happening with the traditional publishers do you think is a result of the current economic crisis as opposed to systemic changes in media consumption?
I think it's both.
Right.
I think it's both. I think that the structural changes have been coming for a very long time, and the economy just accelerated that.
So in terms of what you're watching in the US at the moment, who do you think is really leading the game when it comes to making the transition from offline to online revenue?
Some of the larger national newspapers, the New York Times, surprisingly, despite what you hear about the New York Times has done incredibly well, as has the Washington Post. But again, their online revenues are somewhat less than 20%. Many newspapers are significantly less, have significantly less online revenue.
How do you keep a business going then when your traditional audience is going away, but the audience you're picking up isn't anywhere near as valuable from an advertising perspective?
You hold on to your print advertisers. I think that's the million-dollar question that everybody's trying to figure out. I think you hold on to your print advertisers as much as you can, and your audience, but you grow your online revenues, as much as you can as well.
I know you've spent quite a lot of time looking at the European media industry.
Right.
How does what's happening in Europe compare to what's happening in the US, and what lessons perhaps could newspaper proprietors around the world take from what's happening in Europe?
Well, I think there's a lot of newspapers in Europe that have had competition for a long time, and I think that's a big difference with a lot of American newspapers, regional papers that just have not had competition. And so jumping from suddenly having, a lock on the market with no other competition to moving to an environment where there's so much fragmentation has been really challenging for U.S. publishers.
But I understand you've also spent some time working with The Guardian in the past. Maybe tell me about some of the things you've seen The Guardian do that have really helped to solidify their position online.
The Guardian has really been at the forefront of the web. They really have pushed comment is free, a lot of interactive tools very early on. And I think they've recognized it as a huge possibility in addition to the print media.
Last year we actually had Kevin Anderson from the Guardian Group talking about comment is free and the way that they were seeking to reach out and embrace their constituents. What do you think actually constitutes best practice though when it comes to doing that? Do you think that the Guardian is pretty much at the top of the game, or do you see that actually being superseded or having further room to develop?
What I love about The Guardian is that, the position of The Guardian is to be the world's leading liberal voice. It's unabashedly liberal. But Alan Rusbridger, the editor-in-chief, wants to hear from everyone. Unlike some publications that will only liberal publication will only take one specific point of view. The Guardian is much more open, and I think people really want that, and I think that's why The Guardian has been so popular online in the U.S.
And do you think that's a necessary component then, that a newspaper think about itself more from a perspective of ideology or politics as opposed to geography, given that the internet takes geography away?
I think it's very important to have a voice, and yes, I think that's very important. If you think about the New York Times, for example, it put its opinion writers behind a wall, because that was the unique voice of the New York Times. It's not the breaking news, which we know we can get anywhere, but it's Maureen Dowd, etc. And I think having a very clear, trusted voice is very important.
We're seeing a lot more use of multimedia technology in newspapers online now, or podcasting, video. Do you think that represents a way forward for them in terms of being able to reach out to advertisers and give them new advertising products to include?
Oh yeah. Oh,
Who do you see as doing a good job in that area now?
I think a lot of the larger newspapers because they have the resources to do that. I mean, if you think about it, in some ways, an internet site is more like a broadcast station than a print media, even though it came from print. And so the ability to have a lot more interactive tools is you know, something very, very useful. The Guardian has a new building, and they have 8 multimedia studios now. And I know, you know, we were listening to Fairfax yesterday, and they're really making a push. And they're also looking at TV dollars that can come online that way.
And is that perhaps the future for them, to be looking to compete more by taking revenue from other media forms, by competing in the same fashion?
Yeah, because they've got tremendous audiences. They now need to take a share of the revenue.
Right.
And that's the biggest challenge. It's not the audiences. A lot of these places have tremendous online audiences. It's the monetization that's the biggest challenge.
I guess the big question at the moment then is as that pool shrinks through the recession, who comes out the winner and how hard do you need to fight?
Absolutely right.
What happens to the smaller newspapers then, the regional or metropolitan papers that don't have the resources to build 8 multimedia studios? Well,
local continues to be very, very strong. And you see, if you look at local newspapers and local websites, the audiences often keep coming back again and again and again. They go to check the weather, they go to check shopping, they go to check, you know, school closings, all sorts of things. So really putting forth good local content, I think, is very, very important.
Does that mean perhaps that the print form of newspaper perhaps goes away more quickly in the local context?
Well, you know, I don't think print is necessarily going to go away. And what we've seen is that people who read the print newspaper also go online, and the two work incredibly well together. So it's not either or necessarily.
What do you think of the French model then of coming in and bailing the newspapers out? Do you think that newspaper proprietors should be going to the president and asking for a stimulus?
I can't imagine, at least in the U.S., American journalists taking money from the government. They cover the government. One never knows, though. It reminds me of the bailout of the car industry.
Mm. Although you don't really have the separation of the fourth estate in the car industry,
That's
I suppose.
Right. That's right. But with the car industry, you know, it was somewhat predictable 20 years ago that this was going to happen. Mm. And I think when you look at audiences and sort of how they've moved online, that has been a very clear trend in the last 10 to 12 years.
A lot of commentators have speculated that the position that many newspaper proprietors in the US find themselves in is as a result of overexpansion, overcapitalisation, taking on too much debt, etc. What do you think the long-term future for some of these companies will be then? Do you expect to see a round of consolidation or closure, or do you think that there is still enough hope for a lot of these large organisations to continue on through the crisis?
I think some will continue. I think some will restructure. I think some will, you know, shed their losing assets. But you know, you look at places like the Tribune Company, McClatchy, just with unbelievable amounts of debt, and it's hard to figure out how they're gonna move forward.
Does that make now a good time to buy distressed media assets, or are these things, as the word is now, toxic in the eyes of the investors?
If they're throwing off some meaningful revenue, yes, but I think the prices are low, but the cost to operate them are not insubstantial.
So maybe paint a picture for me. I mean, how do you see the landscape playing out perhaps over the next 5 to 10 years with regard to these media companies?
I think if they can survive this very difficult downturn, it's a rosy picture down the line, because the audiences are there. People still want to hear from trusted sources, but it's getting through this next sort of bad economy that's going to be the real challenge.
All right, Carolyn Little, thanks for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.